نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد بسم الله. Surah Mujadalah. What does Mujadalah mean? It means debate. And it's a Madani Surah, Surah number 58. It has 22 ayats and 3 rukus. And the reason why it's called Mujadalah is because in the beginning of the Surah, it describes a discussion, an argument, an incident between Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and a woman trying to seek his help. And what is the connection of this surah with the previous surah? So the surah prior to this is Surah Hadid at the end of Juz 27. And that surah begins with describing the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ وَالظَّاهِرُ وَالْبَاطِنُ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. And then in this surah, Surah Al-Mujadalah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an example of how he listened to the conversation between a woman and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which even Aisha Radhiyallahu anha could not fully hear, although she was nearby. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Sami' al-Alim. He can hear things, he can see things which are not visible to us, which are not audible to us. So in this surah, Surah Mujadalah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes an incident which confirms to us how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears directly from us whatever we say, whether we say it in private or in public. Also, towards the end of the previous surah, Surah Al-Hadid, it comes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a possessor of great bounty. Wallahu dhul fadlil azim. And then in the beginning of this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes one of such blessings, which was to establish a ruling of zihar for us as an ease for the ummah. So, a brief overview of this surah. This surah outlines rulings on zihar and expiation, meaning the kafara of zihar. And it also describes etiquettes of gatherings and private conversations. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes a few scenarios and how we should interact with each other and be respectful. Then there is a classification of a Hizb Shaitan and also another classification which is Hizbullah. So hypocrites are classified as a party to the devil, Hizb Shaitan, and declared as losers forever. And also there is a description of Hizbullah, the party of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the believers, and they will be victorious. There's something unique about this surah, that it is the only surah in Quran where every ayah has a mention of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you go through all 22 ayahs, you will find that the word Allah actually is mentioned in all of those ayahs. So this is unique to Surah Al-Mujadalah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد سمع الله قول التي تجادلك في زوجها وتشتكي إلى الله والله يسمع تحاوركما إن الله سميع بصير. Certainly, Allah has heard the speech of the one who argues with you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, concerning her husband and directs her complaint to Allah. And Allah hears your dialogue. Indeed, Allah is hearing and seeing, all hearing and all seeing. So the word tujadiluka, this is a verb, and it means that she is arguing with you, with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And it's masdar, mujadalah, the noun from it, and that means a dispute, and hence the name of the surah, Al-Mujadalah. The other word here to know is tashtaki, which is a verb meaning she is complaining. So she is complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about her situation. So there is a background to this verse. It is referring to an incident that happened at the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when a woman, Khawla bin Tha'laba radhiyallahu anha, came to him and complained about her husband, Aus bin Samit. And the complaint was that her husband, Aus bin Samit, had declared zihar to her. And we need to go a little bit into the understanding of the culture of Arabs to know why this was a problem. So first, who is Aws bin Samit? So Aws bin Samit is a brother of a famous companion and narrator of hadith, Ubadah bin Samit. And Aws bin Samit married his cousin, Khawla bin Tha'laba, and at the time when this incident happened of Zihar, they were actually in old age, they were an old couple. So Aws bin Samit said to his wife Khawla a phrase, a sentence like this, Anti alayya ka zahri ummi, which literally means you are to me like the back of my mother. This was a common way in Arabs to express that the wife is no longer lawful for intimacy, similar to how a man's mother is haram upon him to marry. Such an expression is called zihar. However, at that time, in the Arab culture, zihar was considered more severe than divorce. So a man could reunion with his wife after divorce, but could not reunite because zihar was permanent, and they could never live again together once zihar was proclaimed. We should also understand that zihar could be uttered in two different types of statements. And one type of statement is what's very explicit, sarih, which is an example here. And what happens in this situation is husband compares wife to a body part of his mother, like the back, the head, or any other reference. And the other way to do zihar is metaphorical or kinaya, where husband says to his wife, you're like my mother. So just a general statement, you're like my mother. Now this second statement is vague. It could mean you are saying to your wife, you're like mother in manners, in beauty, in character, in taking care of me. So there could be that meaning. Or it could mean that you're like mother in being unlawful and haram to me. So in the second way of zihar, the kinaya, the intention of the husband will be considered. If he intended with this statement to do zihar, then zihar will occur. Otherwise, if he was just saying this as a comparison of a character trait between his wife and his mother, then there will be no zihar. So let's go back to the case of Aws bin Samit. So he explicitly said the words of zihar to Khawla bint Tha'laba. So she came to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and asked for a way to resolve this situation. So she said, "O Allah's Messenger, he," meaning her husband, "spent my wealth, exhausted my youth, and my womb bore abundantly for him. When I became old, unable to bear children, he pronounced zihar to me. Where shall I go now, and how will my children do their living?" So she was desperate. She was trying to figure out a way that they could live together and her husband could still look after her. So by that time, no revelation in this matter had come to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he suggested that the Arab custom of permanent separation would remain in effect for her. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Ma umirtu fi sha'nika bi shay'in hatta al-an, ma araki illa qad hurumti alay." I have not yet received any ordinance regarding your matter. In my opinion, you have become forbidden to him. Now, Khawla bint Tha'laba couldn't see herself living alone and taking care of children without the support of the husband. So she pleads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly to ease her situation. Allahumma inni ashku ilayka. Oh Allah, I direct my complaint to you. And through her plight, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel alayhi salam with revelation. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said to her, Ya Khuwaila, qad anzal Allahu fiki wa fi sahibi Qur'an. O Khuwaila, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed something about you and your spouse. And hence, the first 6 verses were revealed, which explain the ruling of zihar in Islam. And it established an ease for the rest of the ummah in such a predicament. Aisha Ta'ala Anha, who was also nearby at the time of this discourse, is reported to have said, "Pure is whose hearing encompasses all things. I heard what Khawla bint Thalaba said about her husband, while some of it I could not hear despite being so close to her in the same room. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heard all her conversation and said, Qad sami Allah, Allah has heard." So as we discussed in the introduction, this is where, although Aisha Ta'ala Anha was very close to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Khawla Ta'ala Anha at the time, and she could hear some of it, she couldn't hear all of the comments that she made, and yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down revelation saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has heard everything. And after this incident, companions used to greatly respect Khawla bint Thalaba. She had been a cause of abolition of a very strict Arab custom of zihar. You can imagine permanent separation because of utterance of zihar was a problem in that society. So we learn a particular incident that describes to us how companions used to respect Khawla bint Thalaba, where once Umar anhu was on his way with some of the companions, and a lady stopped her for some conversation. So he immediately stopped and listened attentively to her with his head bent down. He did not move until she completed what she wanted to say. But some of the companions around him said that you held back a large group of people just for an old lady because they didn't recognize her. So Umar replied, "Do you know who this lady is? She's Khawla, the lady whose complaint was heard in the seventh heaven. So how can Umar not listen to her? She should be heard for a longer period of time and with greater attention. By Allah, if she did not leave of her own accord, I would have stood with her till the nightfall." So such was the respect that companions had of Khawla bint Thalib. الذين يظاهرون منكم من نسائهم ما هن أمهاتهم إن أمهاتهم إلا اللائي ولدنهم وإنهم ليقولون منكرا من القول وزورا وإن الله لعفو غفور. Those who pronounce zihar among you to separate from their wives, they're not their mothers. Their mothers are none but those who give birth to them. And indeed, they are saying an objectionable statement and a falsehood, but indeed, Allah is pardoning and forgiving. وَالَّذِينَ يُظَاهِرُونَ مِن نِّسَائِهِمْ ثُمَّ يَعُودُونَ لِمَا قَالُوا فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مِّن قَبْلِ أَن يَتَمَاسَّا ذَلِكُمْ تُوعَظُونَ بِهِ وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. فَمَن لَّمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ مِن قَبْلِ أَن يَتَمَاسَّا فمن لم يستطع فإطعام 60 مسكينا ذلك لتؤمنوا بالله ورسوله وتلك حدود الله وللكافرين عذاب أليم. And those who pronounce zihar from their wives and then wish to go back on what they said, that there must be the freeing of a slave before they touch one another, that is what you are admonished thereby, and Allah is acquainted with what you do. And he who does not find a slave, then a fast for 2 months consecutively before they touch one another. And he who is unable, then the feeding of 60 poor persons. That is for you to believe completely in Allah and His Messenger. And those are the limits set by Allah. And for the disbelievers is a painful punishment. So the word yuzahiruna, what does that mean? It's referring to zihar. Yuharrimuna nisa'ahum tahrim ummahatihim, to make your woman unlawful like those of your mothers. And zura means kadiban batilan munharifan anil haqq, falsehood that deviates from truth. We also saw this word yatamassa, which literally means to touch, but in this context it means intimacy with your wife. So these verses brought reform to the ruling of zihar in 2 ways. First, zihar had been declared a sinful act. It is utterly false, since only mothers are the ones who have given birth to them. So this statement is invalid and absurd. And it's also a sin because it is making unlawful what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made lawful. So wives have been made lawful to a person, and yet he is now declaring her to be unlawful. So it's a sin. And the second reform we see is that the husband cannot get intimate with the wife again without paying a penalty or expiation, kafara first. So that's a requirement to finish the effect of zihar. So as it comes in a narration narrated by Ibn Abbas and Tirmidhi, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to a person who did zihar, but then went back to his wife again before paying kafara, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, فَلَا تَقْرَبْهَا حَتَّى تَفْعَلَ مَا أَمَرَكَ اللَّهُ بِهِ. Then do not go near her until you have done what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered for it. And what is the penalty of zihar? So the penalty of zihar could be given in three different ways. The first one is what comes in this ayah, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ. Set free a slave, and that slave could be a Muslim or a non-Muslim, as long as you can set free. So of course this is not possible in today's time. Then the second one is فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ. 2 consecutive months of fasting. So whoever has the health and can do so, that's what they should be doing to pay the kafara of zihar. And the third option is فَإِطْعَامُ سِتِّينَ مِسْكِينًا, feeding 64 people. Now this last option of feeding 60 people can also take different forms. So you could feed 2 meals to 60 people in a single day, or you could feed one person for 60 days with 2 meals per day, or any combination thereof. But when you feed them, you have to make sure that they are feeding with their full stomach, so they are satiated. And then the second way to do it, so one is to have to feed them food. The second form is to give them grain or date or barley. So either give them half sa'a, which is about 1.6 kilo of wheat, or 1 sa'a, which is about 3.2 kilos of dates or barley. And a third option in this category of feeding as an expiation, as a kafara, is to pay the price equivalent to this much wheat or this much dates or barley. Going back to the case of Aus bin Samit, when the details of kafara were revealed, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam asked him to free a slave. But Aus bin Samit said he does not have means to do so. Then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam asked him to fast for 2 months consecutively, but he expressed his inability to do this again. Finally, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam asked him to feed 60 people, to which he replied, I don't have the ability for that either unless you help me. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave him some grains and asked people around him to gather enough food that equal to the requirement for 60 people, and this is how his kafara was paid. Towards the end of the ayah, it comes, ذَلِكَ لِتُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَلِلْكَافِرِينَ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes the importance of this ruling and describes the ruling of zihar as a divine limit, hududullah, with a warning to punish those who oppose and disobey with a severe punishment. So this term, hududullah, comes in various ayats in the Quran. So let's understand what that means. It is generally used in 3 different contexts: awamir, nawahi, and uqubat. So awamir, divine limits for permissible acts which should not be crossed. So you're allowed to take an action, but there are limits set of how much you can do that action. So if you go beyond that, you're crossing the limit. So that's related to actions that are permissible, but there are limits set on how much you can do those. The second context is nawahi, or prohibited acts. So for example, adultery. So things that are prohibited, you should not be doing them at all. And the third one, uqubat, is about punishments that are prescribed or predetermined for sins like murder, drinking alcohol, stealing, and adultery. So there are prescribed punishments by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these acts, and those are also called hududullah. Let's quickly review the first 4 ayats, the summary of those. So what we learned is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to his servants. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to his servants by relieving their distress and fulfilling their needs. So here you had a woman directly conversing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pleading her case and asking for help. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down revelation. So clearly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is out there for us. Anytime we are in need, we should really focus on asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead of asking others. We have to take the means, but we have to first believe and seek help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, those means will become effective for us, or even new means will be made available to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then there's classification of zihar as a sin, and the kafara of it is described in these ayats. And finally, the importance of divine limits, hududullah, are described, and the declaration, if anyone violates them, then there will be severe punishment. إن الذين يحادون الله ورسوله كبتوا كما كبت الذين من قبلهم وقد أنزلنا آيات بينات وللكافرين عذاب مهين. Indeed, those who oppose Allah and His Messenger are disgraced, as those before them were disgraced. And we have certainly sent down verses of clear evidence, and for the disbelievers is a humiliating punishment. So the word kubitu is people who have been disgraced. يَوْمَ يَبْعَثُهُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا فَيُنَبِّئُهُم بِمَا عَمِلُوا أَحْصَاهُ اللَّهُ وَنَسُوهُ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. On the day when Allah will resurrect them all and inform them of what they did, Allah had enumerated it while they forgot it, and Allah is over all things witness. Here is a reminder not to neglect the divine limits again. If you do not respect and follow the rules and sacred laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't think that your transgression will be forgotten. You may choose not to pay attention or forget about your sin, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has recorded everything. These deeds will be shown on the day of judgment, and sinners will be punished accordingly. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مَا يَكُونُ مِن نَجْوَى ثَلَاثَةٍ إِلَّا وَهُوَ رَابِعُهُمْ وَلَا خَمْسَةٍ إِلَّا هُوَ سَادِسُهُمْ ولا أدنى من ذلك ولا أكثر إلا هو معهم أينما كانوا ثم ينبئهم بما عملوا يوم القيامة إن الله بكل شيء عليم. Have you not considered that Allah knows what is in the heavens and what is on the earth? There is no private conversation of 3, but that He is the 4th of them, nor are there 5, but that He is the 6th of them, and no less than that, and no more except that He is with them wherever they are. Then He will inform them of what they did on the day of resurrection. Indeed, Allah is all-knowing. Indeed, Allah is of all things knowing. The word najwa refers to private conversation. And look at the expression Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses here, huwa ma'ahum aynama kanu. He is with them wherever they are. So what does that mean? Does that mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is saying He's physically with people who are having private conversations? No. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above being physically restricted or attributed to a place. So scholars say that here being with them is referring to Allah's knowledge of their conversation. And we learn that also from other verse in the Quran, as it comes in Surah Tawbah. أَلَمْ يَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ سِرَّهُمْ وَنَجْوَاهُمْ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَّامُ الْغُيُوبِ. Did they not know that Allah knows their secrets and their private conversations, and that Allah is the knower of unseen? And in Surah Zukhruf, أَمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّ لَا نَسْمَعُ سِرَّهُمْ وَنَجْوَاهُمْ بَلَى وَرُسُلُنَا لَدَيْهِمْ يَكْتُبُونَ. Or do they think that we hear not their secrets and their private conversations? Yes, we do. And our messengers are with them recording. So, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in these other two verses, that He's aware of their private conversations. So He's all knowing, all hearing of their affairs. And now that you have this context that here being with them means the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you go back to the ayah, interestingly you'll notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins the ayah mentioning His knowledge, Alam tara anna Allah ya'lam, and then ended it upon His knowledge as well, Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. So we get clues here. This is about the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not being physically close or physically with these people who are having private conversations. So the word ma'iyya, or companionship, also requires a little bit more explanation. So the company of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be in two ways. The first one is what we already learned in this ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it refers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge. And such knowledge encompasses both Muslims and non-Muslims, since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Alimul Khabir for everyone and everything. So it's a general power attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second type of company that is mentioned in the Quran is one which is exclusive to Muslims. And this meaning is, this gives the meaning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq and His protection. So in that case, what we learn in Surah Nahl, ayat number 128, Inna Allah ma'al ladhina taqaw wal ladhina hum muhsinun. Indeed, Allah is with those who fear Him and those who are doers of good. So here, by being with such people, it is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's support and protection available to people who are fearing Him and who perform good deeds. So let's review these ayahs from 5 to 7. We see severe warning of disgrace and humiliation given for anyone who opposes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All actions are recorded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, even though they may be forgotten by the doers of those actions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge encompasses all conversations, whether in public or private. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم